The story begins at a tense moment for Saul, the first king of Israel. He was facing a critical situation. The Philistines were preparing for battle, and the Israelite army was frightened and leaderless. The prophet Samuel, who used to guide Saul in times of crisis, had died, and God had stopped answering his prayers. Neither dreams nor prophets nor the Urim, a form of casting lots, brought him any answer. The divine silence was deafening, leaving Saul lost and terrified. He felt abandoned, desperate, and increasingly aware that his kingdom was in danger. Saul had banished witches and mediums from Israel, in accordance with divine law which forbade such practices as dangerous and impure. This banishment represented his attempt to keep the people of Israel aligned with God's precepts, away from the influence of magic and idolatry. However, in the face of extreme crisis and God's silence, Saul found himself so desperate that he chose to break the very law he had established. This decision reveals a deep conflict within Saul. He knew consulting a witch was wrong, yet he still chose to go down that path. The fear of the imminent battle against the Philistines and the absence of answers from God left him vulnerable, driving him to seek help from the very beings he had once condemned. He decided to disguise himself to visit the witch, not only to avoid being recognized by others, but perhaps out of shame for what he was doing. He was willing to do something forbidden and needed to conceal his identity, indicating that even in his desperation, he knew he was disobeying God. The visit to the Witch of En-Dor shows Saul trying to take control of the situation through means that were considered illegitimate and condemnable, which would only worsen his situation in God's eyes. Saul was lost, fearing for his future and the future of his people, and without divine guidance, he ended up taking a path that contradicted everything he had stood for as Israel's leader. This weakness in Saul makes his journey tragic, as we see a king who gradually loses his connection with God and attempts to fill that void with desperate and even forbidden methods. When Saul reached the village of En-Dor, the night was dark, and the atmosphere was tense. He found the witch's hut hidden among the hills. As she received the disguised king, the woman was suspicious. She knew witchcraft was forbidden in Israel and feared for her life. But Saul swore to her that nothing would happen to her. He needed help, and asked her to bring the spirit of Samuel from the realm of the dead. The witch hesitated but eventually gave in to the pressure. When the witch began the ritual, she jumped back. Something unusual was happening, and upon seeing Samuel, she realized who was truly in her home. She cried out, saying, "Why have you deceived me? You are Saul." Saul, with desperate eyes, begged her not to be afraid and to describe what she was seeing. The witch described a god rising from the earth, an old man wearing a robe. And Saul knew it was the spirit of Samuel, summoned by the witch. Seeing Samuel, Saul fell to the ground in respect and fear. The spirit of Samuel, however, did not bring good news. He asked Saul why he had disturbed him. Saul responded that he was in a desperate situation, that the Philistines were rising against him, and that God no longer answered him. Samuel, however, was harsh in his response. "Why do you ask me, since the Lord has turned away from you and has become your enemy?" Samuel repeated what he had already said before his death, that the kingdom would be taken from Saul and given to David. And he added something even darker. "Tomorrow you and your sons will be with me." It was a warning that Saul and his sons would die in the coming battle, and that David would become the new king. This story reminds us of the importance of keeping our faith and seeking the right guidance, even in the most challenging times. Shall we reflect together on what we can learn from Saul's choices? Then subscribe and leave your like. Upon hearing these words, Saul collapsed to the ground, completely drained. He had been fasting, and fear consumed him. The witch, seeing Saul's state, showed an unexpected side of compassion. She urged him to eat something before leaving. Reluctantly, but with no other choice, Saul accepted the food she prepared, a fatted calf and unleavened bread. After eating, Saul departed at night, carrying the weight of the prophecy that awaited him. This encounter with the Witch of En-Dor marks one of the saddest and darkest moments in Saul's life. It shows how far he was from God and how his despair led him to break his own principles. Consulting Samuel only confirmed what Saul already feared. He had lost his connection with God, and his end was near. This moment reveals a vulnerable man who, despite being king, was completely alone, without divine guidance, and bound to his cruel fate.